John's got remotes.
But it does fit town budget.
Excellent, thank you, John. All right, so we're going to call this meeting to order at 6:30 on Thursday, December 14th, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So,
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I did not receive the email from Mr. Spillane, but it's been passed along that he has requested an excused absence. I assume that was part of the email. That you got.
Yes, it was.
Okay. And
I'll forward it to you.
Mr. Dubianski just emailed me about an hour ago, and he cannot leave work, so he will not be here. Wastewater emergency, I assume. And I have not heard from Mr. Condone yet, but I assume he's not coming at this point. So we do have a quorum, so we can proceed. Has everybody gone through? We've got a couple minutes in the last. We got one today, and we got one the day before. Has everybody reviewed that and feel confident in voting on it? Do we want to hold off to the next meeting?
I haven't had the chance to read them.
Any other?
I was surprised by 43 pages.
They were, I have to say I skimmed, but they were very involved.
Well, and if you do read them, you'll see that there's places where she couldn't get the transmission because she wasn't looking at the video, she was going from the audio.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly about the December 9th, the last meeting, there were several votes where you asked people to raise their
Yeah.
hands, and so there's no vote recorded at all. So I think as a minimum,
gonna have to
somebody
announce
would
that.
have to go back
Yeah.
to, I think John was
John took-
taking
you-
draft minutes and
Yes.
go back and fill in what those votes were, because,
Yes.
you know, she basically says, well, there was a vote and it seemed to have passed or failed, but
I guess one question I had on that, John, can she watch the video? To me, it would seem easier than just following the recorder.
She can if she has the video to watch, or if that's easier for her.
I was going to send her that email because I was wondering if there was a reason we didn't, or if it was one of those, they always did it that way.
Mr. Chairman?
Devin?
So the previous recording secretary preferred the video over the recorder for that very
Yeah.
fact. So really what it comes down to, and I'm drawing a blank, well, the IT,
Steve Giannelli.
yeah, the IT director for the town, you know, his ability to get it up in timely fashion, which usually is pretty.
seems to be
it's
going
pretty
pretty
quick,
fast.
yeah. So
I'm going to try
maybe
to
somebody
do,
could send her the link. I'm not sure if she's even aware that exists.
I was going to send her an email pretty much asking that, and I'm going to try to do better at announcing the vote total at least, but I was thinking with this big a committee, it would make a lot more sense to watch the video that we're producing anyway, than just try, because she said it's hard to figure out who's talking. She's starting to figure out all our voices, but sometimes it's hard to figure out who's talking. But yeah, they were very extensive minutes, I will agree with you.
And one other little comment is, there were 11 of us here last week, and a lot of the votes were reported 5 to 4 to 1, which was only 10, and
The chair typically doesn't vote unless it's to make or break a tie.
I've been voting, though.
Have you been voting?
I've been voting. I think we'll have to check the video and check John's. So if everybody could read the minutes, they are quite extensive, and come with edits to the next meeting, we'll get those posted, but we are getting minutes through. Do we have any citizens' comments this morning, before we start the meeting? Okay. We have the presentation of the school budget. We've received our budget packets, and thank you for getting them out on Wednesday. The way I saw this going, Zach, if you and the people you brought from the SAU want to go through and do a presentation, we'll hold off on questions and comments until you guys can run through the presentation, because it's a little long, and then we'll start taking notes and get to you after the presentation.
So I guess to start, everybody has their budget package in front of them. This is basically, if you go into the second page, there's a table of contents that breaks down everything, but you have currently your operating budget, you have our default, you have in the operating budget changes that were made from the first draft through to what was approved by the school board, and then you have a bit of additional data, contracts and everything else. So as we're going through this process, if there's additional information that the committee would like provided next year with the budget up front, so that we can kind of pull it in advance, please let me know so that we can add that to the list. So as we're making changes and tweaks and adding information, the intent is to have this basically just next year become an updated version of what we've already presented. And this will be what we'd like to do going forward, is just to provide as much detail as possible. So if anything appears to be lacking, or if there's anything else that anybody would like, please let us know so we can include it. And we'll just, every year, hopefully we'll make it better and better and better. We have members of the school board and the SAU, as well as some administrators from the school here. So if I can quickly just introduce who's here to anybody that isn't aware of them. So I will ask you to raise your hand just so everybody can identify you. Amber Wheeler is our business administrator. Nate Oxnard, school board member. Patty Sherman is our superintendent. Chris Smith is our principal. Trish LaFond is the office manager. And Jim Dealey is the chairman of the school board. So once we kind of get rolling, we're all here to try to answer questions. We did not anticipate having Miss Wheeler here tonight, but she was able to jockey her schedule around and make herself available. So let's try to use her as much as we can for her depth of knowledge, and try to progress with that stuff. Basically, if you look at the actual budget from us, and you go in, you're going to see in the, in the I column, that's the original draft that came from the administration. That's what was presented to the school board in November, and what we started working from. The school board asked the administration to go back and try to find some savings. We weren't comfortable with the increase that was being presented, and so some changes were made to bring down that initial budget from $13,844,436, which would have been a 5.5% increase, down to what was passed by the school board, which was $13,451,332, which is a 2.57% increase. We've also gone into the budget here, and if you look at the top of the pages, you're going to see a couple of color codings. Basically, what we've done is we asked the business administrator to highlight decreases of 10,000, increases of 10,000, and then as the MBC makes changes, you'll see red boxes appear on any lines that the MBC may change. We also, this year, to help work through the budget, is we asked her to highlight lines that are basically a fixed cost, so special education lines, the salary lines, a bunch of those lines that are basically fixed tuition, so that we can just see how the budget is crafted and drawn up, and what is more so discretionary and what is more contract-driven. So, starting with that, I'd like to, Amber, do you have any other input, as you created most of, or a big portion of this, if there's anything else that you want to hit off on before we roll into it?
Thank you. The other item that we also did this year is we tried to add as much notes within the budget as we could, so that each of the individual lines, you could see the gist of what's included in those lines. So if you have any question on those, please let us know. Obviously, usually the biggest driver is health insurance. So we put a note in there. We did receive a slight increase in comparison to what we originally thought we would be at. And so that's included. The high school tuition line that's in here is what will actually be the cost of tuition for next year. I have spoken with Concord High School, and that data is also in this binder as well. Received a letter from Jack at Concord High School confirming that that would be the amount of the tuition.
So, outside of that, the other tweaks, basically, I had some notes. We have from the last year to, or I'm sorry, from the current year to next year, only big change that the school board's really proposing is we are looking to add another teacher. If you go to the class size roster, which is page, spin this back around again. That would be page 51. You'll see, and this is a page that's asked for every year. It's something the school board looks at every year. But we have seen enrollment increasing, and we would like to, or we are proposing to add an additional fourth grade teacher to try to bring those class sizes more in line with what we as a board have set as our outline, our guideline. on that table as well. If anybody here has seen this before, I think, actually the only, Troy may have, as well as Kevin and Andy, everybody else is new, but that table basically shows, and we can ask Mr. Smith to speak in more detail to it, but it basically shows current number of students this year, the projections for next year, and as you're seeing, enrollment does appear to be increasing again. We're looking at, what we're seeing is an additional 11 positions, or 11 students next year. And then you see the recommendations from the school board, the state, as well as the state max are in the far right column.
How do you want to approach, if we have questions about this particular line?
What I would say is, honestly, I think the best thing to do is let's just start firing the questions through and seeing what.
Okay. I
where it
didn't know
goes.
if you had an
Mr. Chairman.
overall,
No.
I didn't know if you had an overall presentation of the whole budget, or if you just
No,
want to
I-
do questions.
I was
line by
hoping
line.
that, and I don't know, it looks like a handful of people were able to grab the budget in advance. But while we have our SAU staff here this week, I'd like to get as many questions out on the table
Okay.
as we can, so
Okay.
that we can start getting the information back or
Okay.
answered.
Kevin?
So page 51 is probably one of, if not the most potentially confusing pages in this packet. It certainly takes most people some time to wrap their head around it, so it would probably be worthwhile if somebody is feeling adventurous tonight to maybe walk us through column by column, step by step, how this document works. I've been looking at it for, I don't know, 7 years, 8 years. I know Andy has too, so we're pretty familiar with it, but I think having somebody walk through this in some detail for the newer members would be time very well spent.
So I can go into that if you guys would like. So basically, if you're looking at the DCS class sizes, your pre-K through fifth grade is broken out in the left column. And it doesn't necessarily, when you're looking at the teacher names, the numbers associated with the teacher names, the names are placeholders, for lack of a better point. But we have our current class sizes for those rooms in the second column. So if you're looking at, if we use, basically, we'll use kindergarten, current, we see 53 students in that grade level. That's our current this year. If you go down to projected class size, 18, 19, and you look at the first grade total, basically that 53 number carries down to the first grade total. So we're dropping a year when we're doing the projections. So we are anticipating a consistent class size for kindergarten and first next year. Where we have seen growth has been in, I'm just gonna defer quickly, we are expecting it in it was the current third grade going into fourth grade. We have seen this year an increase of 11 students. So you're seeing the 11 students are reflected on the chart because we've already received those students. But we have from last year, when we did these projections out to currently, we've seen an increase of 11 students there. And there was one other class that we saw some growth in as well, Mr. Smith, if I recall correctly. Or is that the one that we saw the bulk of it in this year? Mr. Chairman?
Hold on one second. So, yeah, if you want to go hit the mic, that
Yep.
way we get it. I know, might as well just sit over there.
Yeah. Pull up a chair, Chris.
That way we got everything on minutes.
So, that being said, when we're looking at, say, that fourth grade class, because of the growth in that class, we are looking to add that additional teacher. That carries through to some of the other grades as well. But Chris, if you have some notes or information you want to add to that.
No, I mean, that's accurate.
Okay.
There's other classes where we're hoping we don't get a massive 11 kids moving in, but I don't anticipate that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Kevin?
So if I understand you correctly, and I think I do, what you're saying is if I look at the current third grade breakout of 23, 22, 23, that's kids in seats today, right?
That's correct.
Correct.
Those are
So-
accurate teacher numbers as well.
They are, okay. And
And so those numbers are larger than what was projected on this sheet from last year?
Correct.
Is it possible to add a column or get a copy of last year's sheet, just so we can scan through what the projected was? Actually, a copy of last year's sheet would be great, because that would give us a couple of years trending, and then we could also see what was projected versus what's what actually happened, that, I think with proposing a new teacher, I think that would be very valuable background information.
I'm going to guess that we didn't know there were 11 kids moving in third grade.
That's correct.
That seems a little, very specific to one grade. We might as well look at last year's.
I have last year's exact thing here, and it says to me that last year in second grade, which would have become third graders, it said current students 65, and, the intention was to divide those 65 into 3, which is what happened, and it became 68. So, again, I do have this schedule from last year, and kindergarten last year was 54 and became first grade this year 57. Second grade was 65. No, first grade was 55, became second of only 45? I don't know why these numbers are so different, but this says second grade last year was 65, and now it would be third grade 68. Third grade was 49. Fourth grade this year 50. Fourth grade last year 56. Fifth grade 54. So some numbers did go down, and some went up, but
Was that the projected or the actual?
no, those are, it says current number of students in 16, 17. Projected for 17, 18, the projection was to have 65 in grade 3, and we ended up with 68. So I do think it would be helpful if that other column was there so that everybody, I just read those off, but,
Right,
Yeah, and based on when that was drafted,
right.
we may have known some of those students were coming when we were doing those projections. So, but we'll most certainly pull last year's sheets and.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to be a little more specific, could we ask that that gets emailed to the committee so that we have some time to look at it before our meeting a week from today, just to allow us some digestion time?
Okay. And actually, I wanted to ask a follow-up, if you were done, Kevin.
Yeah.
Do we have a growth study for school?
The demographic study is currently ongoing. It's not completed yet. I suspect we still, it'd be spring before we get it back, but it is something that we started the beginning of the budget this year.
So my concern is the real estate market seems really hot again, and we heard from the building inspector that we have multiple subdivisions going in.
And so we did the school board did do 2 things last year. So we did order an engineering study on the facility. That data is available online. If for anybody that wants to look at it, it is a very thick stack of stuff, which is why we did not print it off, but it's good looking at. In that engineering study, it's gone through the physical plan, everything that we have in our structure, as far as what we currently have, and they're also looking at potential, if down the road we need to add on to the building, what our options would be. That's not a commitment that we are pursuing that. It is just trying to investigate what options the school may have for growth down the road. So that is we're starting to get data back and everything else, and I would say the engineering study side of it is moving along rather rapidly. The demographic study is ongoing, but again, I'm going to guesstimate sometime spring that we're going to see those results back. That will help us really kind of forecast and see if the town looks like it's going to start shrinking. We're seeing kind of a unique trend in that our school population has been growing where other communities in the area have been decreasing. And we just need to know if we're riding on a small bubble here or if it looks like it's going to be a long-term trend, and that's what the goals of the demographic study are.
Kevin?
I'm a little curious as to,
Oh, before we jump, I just wanted to see if anybody else had, I thought you were back on the same page.
Oh.
We got anything else on this page?
Yeah, I have one question, and I think this might have been asked at one of your board meetings, but I didn't quite catch it by watching the video. And that is, my son, when he was in third grade, actually was in a 3-4 class. Have you investigated doing some combo classes? And it worked very successfully. You have to have the right kids in that mix, but, and I believe I heard from a neighbor that at Deerfield School, Community School, there have been mixed classes in the past. Again, I haven't been in the community long enough to know that.
I would defer that answer to Mr. Smith.
7th and 8th grade right now are combined classes. We don't have plans and haven't looked at combining 3rd and 4th grade or the younger grades.
Well, it's just that when you look at the two situations there, you have one projection that is well below your target, and one that is somewhat over, and, you know, if you, again, were somehow able to mix it, you know, you might be able to do without adding a full, you know, because once you add a teacher, it's much harder to, you know, I don't know what retirements are coming up or whatever, but if the population changes again, you know, it gives you a sticky situation.
That's certainly something we can take a look at. It's not something I'd thought of before.
Further questions on class size stuff?
Yeah, actually I do, Mr. Chairman. The column to the far right, I have to admit, I'm familiar with the state guidance and the state maximum, but I have to admit I'm not familiar with the school board recommended, and I was wondering if somebody could give some definition as to how those numbers were arrived at.
So Zach doesn't want to answer this.
No.
Who else do we have?
So, Mr. Deely?
I can touch
Yeah.
on it if you want. Those are.
Hold on 1 second, Jim, just because we're going to get,
I'm gonna stay there. I'll sit down. All right. That's why you have two chairs here, right?
yeah.
All right.
We got a floater microphone too, once those, don't worry, we can get to everybody.
Those numbers are actually legacy numbers. They've been on the books for quite a while. It predates my time on the board, so it's at least 6 years old. It is a guideline that I believe was done through a combination of the administration and the school board at the time. I don't have any huge insight into it, but it is a legacy number at this point.
So to follow up on Kevin's question real quick, Kevin, on the one above, 1.7 above, that's above the school board recommended?
Correct.
Okay. Was that your question?
No, it's not actually. So I have to admit, I'm not sure how long Superintendent Sherman has been with us, but it's my working memory, probably longer, maybe, I don't know. I don't want to date her too much. Do you have any insight as to where the genesis of the school board recommended number comes from?
No, it predates me as well, so it's been a long time.
Thank you.
I'd like to make, Mr. Chairman, one more comment about that then. I have read articles that specify that if you can stay down below 20 at the elementary grades, that is beneficial. You know, I think that's out in the educational literature. I've never read anything where it says getting down to 14 or 16 is, you know, a big jump, even better. And it seems to me the other thing we can look at is, I think over the years, you know, if this is that old, one thing that's changed in the entire school setting is that there are many more adults in every room. Again, just anecdotally, a friend of mine was in a kindergarten classroom. There were 5 adults and 13 children. Now, a lot of that is because of special ed, but I know our student-teacher ratio is the lowest in the SAU, or it has been in the last few years. We were at like 10.8. And so when you're looking at class size, it isn't just how many students are in the class, it's also the ratio of how many teachers are there at the same time. So once again, you know, if there's a way to minimize having to add staff, I think all those avenues should be explored. Thank you.
I didn't ask if you were done with that.
Oh, I was done.
Okay. Do we have anything else on the class size page? I think it's quite helpful to put in there. Okay, so you wanted to move back to the original front page of the budget, I presume, correct?
Well, I have a pretty general question, and that is, what is the definition that we're using to define fixed cost?
So what we asked the SAU to do was to look at the contractual items. So the tuitions, bus contracts, the teachers' salaries, insurances, special education costs. And just to highlight those as being, those are items that we don't have as much flexibility in. Special education costs are, to a certain extent, they are what they are. The busing contract, without removing a bus, that contract is a fixed cost. You have to reduce either bus quantities, same thing with the salary lines, without a reduction in staff, because the salaries are fixed by the CBA, there isn't flexibility in that without a reduction of staff. So those are the items that we just wanted to highlight. Insurances are obviously are a fixed cost as well. So that's what we were looking to highlight.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Kevin?
so I appreciate the attempt to add some clarity to the budget. I have to admit, that's a very broad definition of fixed costs. So the budget right now is in the possession of the Budget Committee. There is a proposed added teacher for this year. So it is certainly not beyond the scope or the authority of the Budget Committee to recommend removing that position, not really recommend, actually taking it out of the budget, putting the line back to have steady staff funding. In fact, salary lines can be reduced. The effect of that is a reduction in force, is a RIF. So I believe we currently have 2 guidance counselors. It's a perennial favorite of some members of the committee to discuss whether or not we need 1 or 2. So some of these fixed costs are not as fixed, perhaps, as the orange might lead some to believe. Some are more fixed than others. So special ed certainly is not really a fixed cost, although it probably is beyond the ability, probably not the scope, but certainly the ability of this committee to recommend changes in special ed line items, because then you'd have to really be proposing a different program placement, whatever it may be, for specific students, of which we obviously don't have access to that information. So the special ed lines are probably more fixed. But the salary and benefit lines, and probably some others when I was going through this, probably are less fixed than concrete.
One thing that, if you got, can you speak to the food service? Because that was a major change in this budget,
So,
which is going to require some explanation.
So, and I will ask Ms. Wheeler to fill in as well, but basically, the school board has been battling with bringing the food service deficit in line for a number of years. It is a place where every school loses some money and funds are transferred in to cover the losses. Ours was a little further out of hand than some of the other districts were, so the board made a decision through adjusting the personnel to reduce those costs and bring them in line with what we would expect to see.
You want to speak to specifics on adjustments?
Are we,
Well, I don't know that we can speak personnel, but we definitely did a reorganization. So what we did is we took a look at how the program's running. We met with the director of food service to see where we could adjust some schedules to make sure that we had appropriate coverage. And so when looking at this budget, where originally it was like $55,000 deficit in that line, which is extremely high. And 3 years ago when I arrived, we had actually had a letter stating that we really need to get control of that deficit because a operating budget should not be covering that much. So we've been working the last few years, or last couple of years, in trying to decrease that deficit. So we introduced some different programs like the Buyers Group and things like that to hopefully cut some costs. But unfortunately, in order to cut substantially, to get that down to what we have, I believe it's 26 or something like that, the only way to do that is to do a reorganization. So we took a look at the program and said, okay, how many hours do we need to cover in order to provide breakfast and lunch as well as cleaning services? And we were able to reduce 2 positions from 32.5 hours to 29 hours. So in doing that, it provides the coverage that we need, but it also allows us to reduce costs in salary and benefits.
We have follow-up questions on this, because it's a pretty big change in the
Please,
budget.
Mr. Chairman. Director of Food Service, is that Deerfield School District or SAU?
No, that's the Deerfield.
Deerfield School District.
Yes.
So the buyers group, I know we've been talking about
Yep.
for years, and apparently we're kind of slow to get that either off the ground or realizing the changes. I
Can I
guess,
interrupt you for 1 second? You want to explain that?
The buyers group?
Yes.
Sure. What it is a third-party company that goes out to bid for vendors, so they shop best price, and then it allows our food service directors to order directly from them and save some costs that way. Mr. Verville is correct. It was slow to get off the ground. I think some of the issue initially was the vendors some of the key vendors that were on there weren't vendors that particularly were used by this district in the past. But within this past year, they did go back out to bid again, and one of the major vendors that the district liked to use is now on that list. So I do know that that is being utilized more frequently than in the past.
Okay. I just wanted some clarification on this.
certainly. Follow-up if I can.
Yeah.
So the corrective action appears to revolve around staffing and benefits. But what's the root cause? Is the root cause of the deficit overstaffing and the benefits that go with it? Or is the root cause, because this is not a new deficit. This is an ongoing problem that's been going on many years. Every year we talk about addressing it, but every year we seem to wind up having this discussion. So the question is, what is the root cause of the deficit?
I mean, looking at, the food and the supplies that are ordered, they're in line with other districts. If you compare them to other districts, one of the biggest pieces is the benefits. Benefits carry a heavy cost, and that is a heavy driver within the food service budget. There are many programs that I don't know if they don't offer benefits or whether they just elect not to take them, but that is a heavy piece to this portion of their budget. We are working with them to find new ways to bring in sources of revenue. We've added a catering line, hoping to get them to possibly sell pies to the public, things like that. Be a little bit creative in order to bring in a little bit of extra revenue. We are tracking how many lunches that are served, how many breakfasts are served, what's being served for lunch, making sure that it's something that the students really want to purchase. So those are all things that we are looking at.
So tracking data is awesome. I'm totally in line with that. I assume that we're also going to track the amount of food that's being prepared so that we know the delta between what we're preparing and what we're selling, right?
I believe they do keep an inventory on those items. I will double check for you, but I believe that they do that.
We had a separate breakdown on food services.
The food services has a,
Okay.
Yep.
Just for those of you, while we're discussing it. Thank you, Andrea.
Somebody have a page number for that?
20.
Thank you.
Yes, page 20.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Oh, yield, please.
Because I am looking at the detail, and I can see that the change that was sort of made recently had to do with the health insurance and the dental insurance. That's the biggest piece of it. Are those existing employees that you cut their hours, and so they went from 32.5, which qualified for benefits, down to 29, which meant they didn't? Or do these have turnover so that, we really aren't taking away something that somebody had?
We did a reorganization of the department of the current employees that were there.
So there are a couple of food service employees who were receiving benefits that the reason there's a big decrease in that line is because they
We've
are-
changed their hours so they will no longer be eligible for benefits.
And how do they feel about that?
I'm sorry, but I can't answer that. I'm not sure.
It's not difficult to find out if you
Or to,
spend time in the community.
further questions on food service.
Yes, just one.
Kevin?
Have we considered outsourcing this responsibility to a third-party vendor, so that we would put them under a fixed dollar contract and make them responsible to meet or exceed whatever the local, state, and federal requirements are.
We have not, but what I can say, and I honestly cannot remember the district off the top of my head, but I do have it in my office. We did take a look at a few other districts that weren't in our SAU to see what the cost of those programs were. And out of the ones we pulled, one of them did outsource, and they had a substantial deficit as well. I'm sure there are probably others within the state of New Hampshire, but it was a town around this area. I don't want to say what it is because it could be an incorrect, and I don't want to give you an incorrect answer, but certainly at the next meeting, I could provide you with the district we took a look at, and we can certainly in the future take a look at some other districts that do provide an outsourcing rather than internal services.
Follow-up?
Yeah.
So I guess I'm having a little trouble wrapping my head around that. So if you delegate to a third-party vendor and you put them under contract, I'm not sure how the deficit becomes the responsibility of the district, right? So they contract to provide services, they provide the services. If they don't bid correctly, don't budget correctly, that falls on the business, right? That becomes a loss to the business, not how does the district become liable? It seems to me that you should be able to find a vendor that could provide these services, and it might not be cheaper, right? It might not be cheaper, but it might end this gross fluctuation and take some of the management responsibilities off both the local district and the SAU. I don't want to speak for others in the room, but I think we all probably have more than enough stuff on our plate. And when we have to delve into this and spend time and resources, when perhaps offsourcing it to third party might give everybody, both the district and the SAU, a little breathing room.
Well, I'd say let's
Just a
not get
suggestion.
too far off in the weeds on that one, but if you could bring the info at another meeting, if there was a district around that did it.
Sure.
Thank you. Further on food service before we move on, are there any other big changes, substantial changes that we can kind of hit and discuss while we have everybody here? I know, like I said, I know food service flipping through was a big one.
There was changes in the,
Or if any of the other school board members want to.
it was special ed, the special ed transportation.
Which pages?
Yeah, can you bring us to a page and a line? if you can?
Yep, let me,
It would be 4.
Okay.
page 4, and, so decreases came through the special education line, it's line 105. We saw a $78,000 decrease. If we go,
Just want to speak to that real quick?
it was a change in need.
Change in staffing need.
It was a change in individual student needs.
Okay.
It created a change in staffing.
Okay.
Mr.
Andrew?
Chairman, I don't think we actually have fewer positions, do we? SBED teachers, that's the salary line. And it seems to me that the reason that we might be below last year's salary is that there were 2, I think, SPED people that might have retired, and we replaced them at lower salaries, maybe? Just a maybe.
Yeah.
We had one position that is no longer in there. I believe it was,
And
So
I,
there
we
actually
have
is-
somebody retiring that we're not replacing.
and we have a roster, which is
Right.
page 21,
Yeah,
that we can,
okay.
that is in the budget, if you want to check teacher by teacher.
So we saw a reduction in that line.
Okay.
Again, we did see some other increases.
While we're on page 4 there, just, we're 15,000 on, lower on computer network replacement. Just, how'd we save money?
Less-
Give us specifics.
Less demand. I would ask, we will be having Ms. Trotter in at some point as well.
Okay.
Not Ms. Trotter, Ms. Bover, I'm sorry.
Okay.
And when Ms. Bover comes in, she can speak
Okay.
directly to that stuff.
Mr. Chairman?
Kevin?
So to that point, and I have not delved very deeply in this budget, but one of the things that I do seem to glean from it is that our technology costs for both equipment, maintenance, contracts, all the way around,
Went down.
continues to get larger and larger and larger. And it's because it's peppered throughout all kinds of different lines. And I was wondering if it would be possible for somebody to break out what the total tech spend is and what it has been, so that we, instead of trying to find all the various little lines, to just look at it as one piece. Because we continue to invest and expand in technology.
That information is Appendix B, starting on page 14.
14.
And there's a number of page 13s now.
There's a lot of page 13.
And you'll see there are notes in the lines referring you to the appendixes with,
And the other thing that I've done is on that technology sheet, I have referred to the line that it refers to inside the budget.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
There's quite a bit of backup in here. It's going to take us a while to start delving through all of it. One that I had a question on is on page 8, Zach, just on school board contracted services. We dropped from, I guess it's just, we had voted 15,000, we hadn't spent, so we dropped 14,999.
That was money in last
engineering.
year's budget for the engineering study.
Thank you, Andrew and Zook. I just want to use the people here while we got specifics, so.
Yes.
Does anybody else have specifics?
Mr. Chairman?
Andrew?
I'd like to talk a little about the tuition line because I can see, actually, my book is not up to date now because the tuition number students went down to 181 or 182 from whatever I had in the, my number for tuition, just so everybody knows which book they have. Mine still says 2305323.
That is
What page and
that
line
is-
are we on?
That's line 30.
Oh,
Where are we?
it's, well,
Page
it's
2.
on page 2, but then on,
How can your book be different than mine?
We just got,
I
They're
picked
all
mine
for-
up the other day.
That didn't change.
Well,
Nothing changed there. So
the bottom line, though, if I look at page 13, maybe it's that the 13 appendix changed. Appendix A at the bottom, and I just noticed this tonight when I got here, so says 2276185, and it talks about 181 students.
which
Total.
13 are you on?
I'm on 13.
the original 13,
The original 13.
Well, the 13 that I have.
which we all have.
Yeah.
Okay, so that says 2276.
No, yeah, but that's including the entire page, which includes PACE as well.
Okay.
Okay, but it's a lower number than what I have over on page 2, 2305, 323. And the other thing is my Co-Brown students on page 2 say 7, and my
13 is 5.
13 has 5, and my total students over on page 2, I'm sorry, have 180,
You are correct.
182, which is
So
8
just-
plus, so there's like a 2-student,
So we need a new page.
Yes, and those were
13.
2 changes that were just made last week. And the changes up above were made on this chart, that the projected tuition, but not down below, so that change does need to occur. You are correct.
But the number on page 2 is the correct number then?
the working budget is the budget that will be.
Yeah,
regardless of the
no.
backup, so.
I need to verify before I
Okay.
answer that, please.
Okay.
well, then, going along that same line, you know, I can see, and there's a great deal of detail here from Concord and Jack Dunn, and, you know, I think that's excellent. But the one piece I don't know is, what number did we guarantee? Because in February of last year, we're supposed to send a guarantee to Concord to say, okay, we're going to pay for this many this year no matter what, and if it comes in less, you'll owe us something back. So we budgeted for 171 at Concord. did we pay, are we paying currently for 171?
What has happened is that last year, that guarantee did come into play in regards to, or it is in the agreement. Concord did not ask us for a guarantee, so they have only been billing us only the students that have been attending.
So they're not following?
We are working through that now. I actually
Okay.
spoke with him earlier today in regards to that, to see where we were at with that and where we need to be for this February. So I've spoken to him, and then we will speak with the board when we meet next round and figure out how we need to move forward. And then I will also meet with Jack again to make sure that we're following what we need to follow.
Okay, so, yeah, what I was getting at is I thought we might have something coming back, but you're saying, no, we just simply under-budgeted last year because, remember the big difference? Last year, you budgeted a 5% increase, and it turns out that once you got the rate, it actually was lower. However,
We also had less students, too.
and then there were fewer students.
Yep.
How many are we?
We were
running
billed
right now?
last year for 160 students.
Right, it actually came in, I think, he gave me a number of like 159. But this year, where we thought we were going to have 171, how many did we actually end up with at Concord? You said they're
Oh.
billing us currently, right, for the right
For this-
number?
To be honest, I don't have that number off the top of my head,
Okay.
but I definitely, I will get you that.
Well, Zach gave us a sheet,
Which is
That-
in here, if I recall correctly.
yeah, that said, I think 167.
If we can just get a page number for the rest of us.
Oh, it's in 48 to 50, I think.
While you're looking for that,
Why?
did you, why, while you're looking for that.
Oh, I have it.
Did
It's,
did you call Jack Dunn directly yourself personally?
I did as a citizen last year, yes.
I hate
And,
to say that. I
well,
just
because
wanna-
I just was concerned about the tuition line last year, and, so I spoke with him. And so on page 49, I actually have an adjustment to suggest there. And that is that, beginning with last year, we actually had a different contract. And instead of paying just tuition, it was broken into two pieces, tuition and a
Capital fee.
capital
Yeah,
fee.
yeah.
So for 17-18, we had budgeted 12,165, but our actual was not 11,297. It was actually 11,667 because of the $470 fee. And this year, our tuition line there says 12,029, but that's not the total of what we have to pay Concord. We really have to pay 12,512 because the capital fee went up to 483. And we do have those numbers elsewhere, on the, they are on page 2, but I just thought if we're looking at this schedule and trying to be consistent going across from year to year, we should be showing the total we're paying to Concord. Now that it's just broken into two pieces, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't show the whole amount. So 17-18 should have been 11,667, and 18-19 should be 12,512.
I will add a capital line, because that's what you're talking about.
Right,
It's the capital line.
it's the capital line, because those other years didn't have a capital line, but to be comparable, that was the total that we were paying for those other years.
Sure, and in comparison for this chart, I was trying to compare apples to apples, but I
Right.
certainly can put that line in so that you can see it.
I believe Kevin's got a question for, at a stopping point on that.
Okay.
No, she can hold, I
Okay.
can hold my question, I'll yield the floor,
Well,
certainly.
just, also then, if you're redoing some of this schedule, down at the bottom, the estimated 18-19 is still showing 183. And again, I think that number has shifted a little bit, as you pointed out, that there were two people that, and just one last question about that. Do we ever lose students? We look at, I could see, let's say there were 46 students graduating 8th grade. Certain percent of them have to go to Concord, but when we look at how many actually go somewhere, do some students do one of two things. Perhaps they go to a Catholic school. They, do we actually lose some numbers along the way? So maybe we shouldn't project everyone to continue on? Has that happened? I mean, why did we go from projecting last year, 16, 17, I get confused about the years, but we were telling Concord we thought there were going to be 169 or 170, and it turned out to be 160. And again, I don't think it's that we didn't know how many were moving up. I just wonder, do we have any track record of how many go someplace else?
So there's a number of factors that work into that. One of them being is families move and they come and go as they please. And so a portion of that, and it's very difficult data to track, obviously, is a family can move. And once the students have been sent to Concord, they don't call us and say, hey, so-and-so moved from Deerfield to Pembroke. It's not, we don't see that in that regard. So we have to be notified that they've left, which Concord will do, but it's not, there's a moving van pulling out of town, they swing by the school and they tell us that there's 3 high school students that are leaving. So that is where we see some of the decrease. Outside of that, students that attend Catholic schools aren't counted into that. So, were you asking if the students in the Catholic schools or
Well, I was just
homeschooled are
wondering
into
if
that
we
other
have-
percentage as well, or?
No, if we have 46 students that graduate 8th grade, do really only 42 of them perhaps go on and be our responsibility, because at that point, their parents decide to do something different?
So we budget for the number of students we know we have.
Right. And do we have a track record of how many we might lose along the way?
Or gain.
Or gain.
Or gain, right. I
Right.
mean, people could move in. Yeah, it
Yeah.
could go in either direction.
It could. It's, I don't know that I've seen the data quite that way, but we could try to find a way to disseminate it a little bit better.
So I can shed some light on this if
Go ahead,
you'll
Tim.
yield the floor. So this is a question that I was asking Superintendent Sherman, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago. And she didn't have the answer at her fingertips. And so I did a little more digging, and I found out that answer really doesn't belong necessarily at her fingertips. So if you, it's a strange little collection of laws. So the district is responsible to make sure that every child is receiving an education. And the way they're responsible for that is the truancy laws, right? So if you stop sending your kid to school, they're supposed to knock on the door and say, hey, where are your kids? To make sure there's not neglect and whatnot. But there's other ways that kids can stop going to school. So you can remove your children to either go to private school or to homeschool or, whatever mixture of services you want to avail yourself of. They no longer have to report that to the district. It used to be all funneled to the district, and the district uploaded it to the state. The RSA has been changed, and now there's multiple points of reporting. You only have to pick one. And so if a family chooses to report to the state, then the district doesn't necessarily have transparency to that. And you only have to notify once at the point of departure. So I don't have to tell Deerfield I'm homeschooling year after year after year. I just have to tell them once I've got my kids, I'm homeschooling, I'm all set, thank you very much. And then the district is, relieved of their duties for all of that. So the way that those numbers and where those numbers are being reported makes it difficult, if not impossible, I think, if I understand it correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, Superintendent Sherman, because I asked the state, and the state's like, oh yeah, it all changed a couple of years ago. So those numbers really aren't easy to get at.
So to go from there, using the 8th grade numbers as moving to high school is probably the easier and more legitimate budget choice.
It's it's at least an accurate sample at a point in time.
Unless, as the committee woman suggests, that if you looked at the numbers of how many you had graduate 8th grade and how many went to Concord, if you were always, more or less 10% down or 5% up or whatever it was, then, you might actually move that number if there's some sort of consistency. I don't know if there is or isn't, but that but you'd have to track those numbers over time to really see if there's any trending.
Follow up on this discussion then, Andy?
Yeah. I think it's much like, planning for snow removal or storm mitigation or that sort of thing. You've got to pick the best number you can pick. I've been coming to this board for 20-odd years, listening to the same conversation every year about how are we going to tighten up high school tuition budgeting, and the fact of the matter is, I don't believe you're going to. We have people that switch schools, we have people that move in and out of the community, has been discussed, we've had students pass away, we've had people that started homeschooling their freshman year, halfway through their sophomore year, have decided this was not working for them, they really want their child in Concord, and you're just always going to have some leeway and some slop in this number.
I just,
Okay, yeah, if you got some follow-up, I know Kevin was moving on, but we'll do some follow-up on this one. He's been yielding, so.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So it goes to the billing. So what is the schedule? What is the frequency of billing? How often do we as a district get a bill from Concord and know what that number is?
We get billed 3 times a year,
And are they,
and they are on time.
no, but what is the time? Is it,
I believe it used to be September 1st, it's now moved to October 1st, February 1st, and May 1st, I believe, and I believe that's in the
That is in the
it's in the
contract.
contract.
it is?
In
And
the
does
contract.
anybody remember what the split is? It's probably not a third, is it?
I highlighted it. If you give me a moment, I might be able to find it.
No, it's not. It's
No.
25, it is different.
It is 25, 50, which would make 25.
Great, thank you,
And
Zen.
that's section 5 of page 5 of the contract, section 5.
And I assume the reason we went to October 1 is that's the daily attendance number that gets reported to the state, so is it keyed to that?
That would be my assumption, but I wasn't here when they revised this contract, so I'm not confident. I'm guessing that's why.
Understood, thank you.
Andrea?
On that point, I have seen that Concord keeps actually a monthly tab of attendance, so, and then, they prorate if somebody leaves, but if they stay beyond the end of the first semester, they count for a whole year. It's spelled out in the contract, I think, how that works.
That is correct.
The last question I had about tuition goes back to the other schools that students choose to go to. And I did, again, watching one of your videos, hear somebody reply that we cannot only pay Co-Brown what we pay Concord because of some legal issue. And my question was, other school districts I know hold themselves to their contract with their main school, and they only pay the other schools that amount, and if a parent, wants to pick up the rest, then, they can go to the other schools. Is there some reason in our district that we don't do that?
So those other districts are using tuition agreements. We are required to send the percentage of students to Concord. The only option that our students have to choose another school is by applying one of our school board policies, either the best interest policy or the manifest hardship policy. So if a student qualifies under one of those 2 policies and we agree there's a reason that the Concord High is not appropriate for them, then we have to pay the tuition. So if we used a different process similar to Hooksett, then we could do that.
So it's not just simply at parental choice. In other words, I
Correct.
say, oh, I really think my child would do better at Co-Brown.
That's correct.
There has to be a manifest hardship.
Or it has to be in the best interest, and the parent has the burden of proof of why that would be.
Thank you.
And there are a good 20 years of back and forth and community infighting that have led us to
How to
that
handle
point.
that.
Do we have anything else on the tuition? I think we've handled it pretty well, Kevin.
Well, just to that point, so it's a district policy, right? So that's a decision that we make as a district, that's how we choose to place kids outside of Concord. So that, that policy is at the discretion of the school board.
So, if we're done on high school tuition, I wanted to switch to page 22, which is after the first, it's in the roster. And I was just wanted somebody to speak. We have 2 retirees, and I know there's going to be a question coming up, how did we budget for the new employees coming in? So I wanted you guys to speak to that.
So we have 2 retirees. The replacement for those are budgeted at a master's step 5.
That is correct.
Which is, I'm guessing, not where the people retiring is currently at for a step level?
The people retiring without, I'd have to go and check to see where they are, but based on the time they've been with us, I would suspect they are at a much higher step.
Okay.
The first one in particular, last year was at 68,000, so that's a $20,000 savings by hiring at a lower amount.
I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention because I
Right.
thought you guys did a good job budgeting that, and it would answer a question that we usually have later on in the budget.
It is a
season.
question that does come up every year. So there is 2 known retirees, and when you look at that roster on 22, you do see we have the open position budgeted as well as a master's 5.
At a master's, step 5, yes.
Master's step 5, yep.
Okay. Ian, seeing that, do we have any questions on the overall roster while we have everybody here? Or retirement system, et cetera?
And there are, if there is questions on the pay ranges and everything, there are copies of the teacher's contract as well as the para contract included in your package, which has the pay tables.
I did have a quick question about that technology coordinator. Is that position also being filled, or is that?
The technology coordinator is a certified staff member and teacher on the staff.
Okay, I just see
Yes, so the current
retiree.
is
whatever.
retiree.
Yeah.
And they're going to hire somebody new.
We will hire
at
someone to
that
fill that
salary
position.
line.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And I believe there was one other major retirement in here as
The
well, correct?
special ed director is retiring as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Which is on page, do we have any idea on that?
29.
29, thank you. Do you just want to speak to the salary on that one?
We have budgeted that salary flat, if I recall correctly.
It's slightly under than what the current is, but it's 78,000 and change currently.
Okay. We will, that will be a tough position to fill. That is something that the school board will start looking into in upcoming meetings and trying to see how that will all play out.
Okay. Any questions on this part of the budget? I'm just trying to run through and highlight big stuff here, and if anybody else has spots.
And again, if anybody sees any information that they'd like us to include, please ask so that we can bring you either updates currently, and then going into next year, we also want to be able to bring any additional information that we feel would be helpful. If we can provide it in advance, it just makes everything a little bit easier for everybody.
If
May-
you have a question, go right ahead.
Well, I just wanted to make a statement. So earlier I mentioned about health insurance going up slightly. It went up 3.4. But also on that line, you're going to notice there's a substantial increase. There's a couple factors that played into that. When I first tallied that roster, it was a huge red flag for me because the increase was substantial. So I went back, I pulled our roster from last year that we budgeted with and the new roster, and we had several plan changes that occurred after July 1st. There were several employees that had a buyout plan that ended up going to the higher plans. So that played a huge role in that line. So I just wanted to note, because if someone were to do a calculation of 3.4% off the prior year, you're not going to arrive at that figure. Plan changes do play a role in that.
You had a question, Andrew?
Oh, I just been reading about opt-out plans because I read the contract that said, you know, if you don't take insurance through us, you may take, I don't know, if you're so many years, you can get $2,500 or, you know, full-time, whatever. And everything I was seeing was flashing red lights saying, be careful of Obamacare, be careful of Obamacare, because if you aren't to the letter about those opt-out plans and what you allow them to opt out for, and I noticed you require them to certify that they have other coverage, but they must have minimum coverage, they must have it at affordable pricing, you know, all those things that can create penalties. And I just was wondering, are you keeping track of those pieces that are, just annoying beyond annoying?
Yes, I believe our HR department does do that. Because we have to report it at the end of the year. We have to send out documentation for their taxes. So we do have to keep track of that.
And you said more people are taking plans over the.
Yeah, we actually had several individuals that had buyouts that moved to an actual plan, which usually goes the opposite direction, but in this case, there were quite a few.
And one last follow-up on that. When they take the coverage and they pay their 20% or 25%, whatever their level is that they have to pay, I believe I read that you have a Section 125 plan where they can do it on a pre-tax basis. Is that right?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I will have to speak with HR to find that answer. I'm not positive.
That would be helpful to know, because if they elect to do it on a pre-tax basis, then that piece is not subject to FICA. And so, as everybody here knows, I'm all over FICA. And, you have FICA going up significantly as well, and it would seem to me if more people are in the plan, then those should be pre-tax dollars and shouldn't be subject to FICA. So, I just want to make sure the FICA was budgeted properly.
I budget the FICA off of the salary lines as well as co-curriculars, anything that is paid out in a wage. But I will definitely speak with our health benefit coordinators.
Right, because the difference between W-2 wages and FICA wages, that amount that you contribute into your health plan, again, if it's through a 125 account, you can actually, if your salary was $50,000, if you take 5 and put it to health insurance, your FICA is only on 45. So if you're budgeting FICA on the gross salary, then that's more than perhaps is needed.
Okay, I will definitely take a look at that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any new lines?
Not a line, but page 50. I'm curious why we chose to run a 7-year history. The New Hampshire Department of Ed's got data going back to 2006. I was wondering if we could expand that graph to include at least the information that's current on New Hampshire Department of Ed.
The original run was because I requested 7 years, figuring it was typically the committee looks for 5 years worth of data, so I figured we'd go a couple years beyond that.
So could we just update that to include the current window of data that's on New Hampshire Department of Ed site? I believe it goes to 2006, and I don't know if that's 5.6 or 6.7, I'm not sure. If you go to the district profile page, it's a drop down by year, and it goes back to whatever year it goes back. If we could just update it to show what that information is, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
You gave that to me, for us.
Yeah, that was a handout we got a couple of meetings ago.
Did you get this handout? It did do 10 years, and I think it's,
It's not graphed, but it was the.
right.
Yeah, well, if we're gonna have this ongoing and running, if we could just get the amount of information that's, easily publicly available. Personally, I think there's value in having it graphically. I tend to be a visual learner, so it helps, certainly helps me to see it that way.
I actually had a question that I'm surprised you haven't brought up yet, Kevin. So if you were done, I was going to address it.
I'll yield.
Since we have everybody from the SAU, I just wanted to kind of hit the elephant in the room. On the SAU, we've had some questions on how other districts' issues may or may not affect Deerfield. If we could have somebody speak to that real quick, possibly the superintendent. We've had some questions if that's going to affect Deerfield at all.
The issue in Pembroke was, the majority of it was the tuition revenue from the sending towns, and you do not send to Pembroke Academy, you send to Concord. The other revenue issues were Medicaid, catastrophic aid, adequacy aid. So Amber is, using current numbers as we always do and then estimating down. So we will go over the revenue sheet with you and she can explain how she estimates revenue.
But just so we're all on the same page, since we don't have students attending the schools
Correct.
involved, so
That's
we're
right.
not involved. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Kevin?
So since we're on that, I guess, I'm the one that sort of asked it early on, when things were just sort of getting out into the public sphere. And, you know, one of the things that we've noticed is year on year, we tend to have a very large high school tuition line item surplus. And, you know, the news hit fast and hard relative to what went on, or is going on in Pembroke. So the question was to the school board member to encourage the school board to make sure that we've got adequate accounting controls in place so that we wouldn't find ourselves in a similar situation. I'm not suggesting we would, I just thought it would be a good time to redouble our efforts in that arena to make sure that we don't somehow end up in the same spot. So that was the genesis of the question. But there are some differences, and I guess I'd like to ask a couple of them now, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman. So we're sort of the odd duck in the district, right? So as I understand it, there's 5 districts. The districts are all independent, pre-K through 8, whatever they offer in that window. I don't know if they all go pre-K, but they're all independent districts, pre-K through 8. And then where the change really occurs is at the high school level. And I'm under the impression that the 4 other districts of SAU 53 are under an area agreement for high school with Pembroke Academy, right? Is that correct? And we are not. Yes, okay, so 3 sending districts in Pembroke. They have an area agreement that harkens back decades. We are not members of the area agreement. We sort of go it alone, and we essentially contract at will for whatever period of time we choose to negotiate with a high school. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct.
Okay, so our situation is quite unique. The benefit, from my point of view, that we have is that we get to renegotiate every however many years. So whatever that contract length is, currently we do it for 10 years, right? We've been taking 10-year bites, I think. So every 10 years, we get to reevaluate it. That's not necessarily true under an area agreement, right? An area agreement has a legal structure that is more difficult to modify. Would that be a fair assessment?
That is, and an area agreement is also not a tuition agreement, so it is slightly different.
Yeah, so we should count our blessings that we are not, in my opinion, in an area agreement.
Okay. I actually had one other follow-up question on that. On the Pace Academy, we have a tuition line, so my understanding was one of Pembroke's problems was that a lot of kids split off and went to the charter school that weren't accounted for. Can you guys just speak, how does the Pace Academy tuition line work with the school district? I'm not sure who I'm actually addressing this one to, but
We're all here to help.
with the choice of, we send the kids to Concord, and we also have a charter school option, how is that affecting our tuition lines?
So PACE is a public charter school. Any family can take advantage of that. It is a school-sponsored charter school, so Pembroke sponsored the startup of PACE Academy. So all of our area districts have access to PACE. They are guaranteed slots. Something unique to Deerfield is they're not part of the AREA districts. They have preference for seats at PACE because they're part of our SAU, but they are not part of the area agreement that sponsored PACE. But PACE is open to any parent to take advantage of in the state of New Hampshire.
Okay. That was more of an info than an actual budget question. We have further questions on this very large
There was
budget.
I was going to say, there was a couple of other lines where there was some changes. They weren't anything huge, but maybe worth just noting.
Yep, just give us a page number.
If you go to page 10, line 336, We had budgeted last year for 8 buses. While doing some wrangling and adjustment with the routes, as well as working with the transportation company, we found a way to satisfy our needs while running 7 buses. So going into next year, we have proposed and budgeted for just the 7 buses that we're currently using.
On the same basic transportation plan we're doing right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, at least that's what we're looking at. So we do see a savings there. You do see below that, unfortunately, we do have some increased special education transportation costs,
Which wipes out that.
which undoes that.
Mr. Chairman?
Andrea?
While we're just looking at that same page, I think I asked this question before, but having to do with special ed, and I know we have, IEPs for certain students, et cetera. Are these identified students that have identified costs, or is this, it's like we have 12 identified students, but we need to budget for 14 because we don't know what might happen? Is there any room in this? What happens if another body comes in that really needs all this extra help?
I think there's like 3 questions there.
Yes, sorry.
We budget off of what we know today, because really anything could happen. We could have a student leave and we could recoup $200,000. We could have a student come in and it could go the opposite. So really what we need to do is we base off the students that we have today, and anything that we know, there are potentials that we know in the future. If we know we've heard of students moving into our district, we do calculate for that. But we can really only go off of what we know and hope that a student with, specific needs doesn't increase the budget significantly.
Thank you.
It is quite a change, though, when you see, the summer services, you guys, after all the work to craft the transportation and saving us 36 on one end, and we spend 24 at another end, but.
It is what it is.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
I just want to say as well as we are going to be putting out an RFP for special services transportation. So it is our hope that of the vendor that we utilize moving forward. It could potentially be the same vendor, but if it's not, maybe we could recoup some costs there as well.
Just on a general school bus question, there aren't that many other vendors to go from, correct?
To be honest, there really isn't. I mean, even when we put out the transportation bid for regular transportation, we had one vendor that bid.
That's, yeah.
So yes, you are correct, but there are some out there that specifically work in regards to special ed, so it could be slightly different for this second RFP.
Okay. I had a question on page 3, Zach. On
Which page?
Page 3. I want to hit a small line. On line 58, art supplies. We got $1,000 for the whole school for art supplies?
That was one of the adjustments that was made by the administration when we asked them to find what they could.
So, Mr.
It doesn't
Chairman,
seem like a whole lot of art supplies for the school.
Mr. Chairman,
Kevin?
if I may. So, I'm gonna, since you opened it up, I want to go down that path a little bit. So,
I was going to make a motion to change it, but if you wanted to go ahead and discuss.
I'll yield if you want to make a motion.
I was going to make a motion to increase line 58 to 13,000.
One more time.
You're looking to increase it
Page
back to
3.
the original.
I was looking to increase it back to the original 13.
I would second
Second.
that. Or Kevin can second it.
Just if
I'll
if you
second
were
that.
going, it seems like a very small amount of money for the entire school's art supplies. It jumped out at me when I was going through the budget. So that is my speaking to the motion. It's the first one I've made lately. Is there any further discussion to the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 1. So, sorry, to the tape recorder, we have 1 opposed.
So it's seven-
Abstentions?
Is it 7-1?
It's 7 to 1. Okay, now I feel like we actually made a progress on something. Kevin,
Okay.
did you have a further one before I cut you off on that?
Well, no, thank you for the motion. It's certainly welcome. So I have to admit, in the limited time that I spend in the school, some of the academic supplies certainly seem to be wanting. So physical quality of paperbacks used for reading groups, et cetera, are lean. And I have no intention of relitigating this point unless somebody else wants to help. But I continue to get complaints on the supplies that are used in the classroom. And I get it from people that work in the building. I hear it from students. And it's unfortunate. I mean, so we buy brown paper towels that simply don't absorb anything. And when they're in the most need, it is to absorb things that you want readily out of the room. We buy tissues that children akin to sandpaper, and it's unfortunate that we do that. I think it's penny wise and pound foolish. I guess my larger question, if somebody could walk me through it, what are the educational priorities that are embodied, on sort of a meta level? What are the educational priorities that are embodied within this budget when it comes to direct student services?
I'm almost looking at Jim for that one, but Nate's jumping.
No, take it away, man.
When we started the process and we saw the first number that came back to us and we first put the whole budget together, it was a very large number. And it was too much, I think, for any of us to in good conscience, go forward with. So as we've pointed out, we call them fixed, but maybe fixed isn't the right term. But what we were trying to convey is that many of those costs are beyond our scope. So then that question we wrestled with, what are our priorities? And for me, speaking for myself, probably the biggest priority that I would like to put into, and I'm glad to see is in this budget, is the idea that we have written in and codified and legislated increases and services for a large chunk of the student body, but that doesn't cover all of the student body. And so if we are required to, by the state, increase services for the identified special ed line, that's on the order of $200,000, to bring to the town a flat budget or something that is easier to stomach, that means cutting other services. We made a change last year where we had a position switch where we started a math. It wasn't officially a math specialist, but it was a math. It was a new position that helped divide the math services that we could provide to all of our students. And with that change, we were able to better differentiate the services that students were receiving. So it wasn't just targeting identified students, but students who were across the whole spectrum were able to receive more personalized instruction. And classes could be a little bit smaller to, when possible, to make that possible. At the middle school level, we were able to regroup some of the instruction with that in mind, and there was more co-teaching. There was more kinds of new approaches that we hadn't taken in the past. Made an attempt to address math scores, made in an attempt to address maximizing the learning of as many students as we possibly could. And so I was happy to see that was one of our priorities this year. And with the increase in student body size, we were faced with potentially reverting that position back to a classroom teacher to account for the increase in student size. But I am glad to see that we kept that position. We're adding a teaching position, and
we are able to keep these new services that we're able to provide to all of our students, differentiating instruction to all of our kids across the whole spectrum, and in that way maximizing learning as much as possible. And so to be able to pay for that, we're making, and we asked the administration to make changes where we could. And so I can hear your concern that maybe it's a penny wise, pound foolish, but if that allows for really what is proven educationally to be the most effective, which is having good, solid teachers in the classroom and smaller classroom sizes and more differentiation, if we can get that, for me, that's my priority out of this budget.
So I guess we sort of go back to some points that were made by some of the other members. So we're putting bodies on it. I see that. I totally see that. We're putting technology on it. I see that. I can find that. But I'm going to guess I'm probably reading some of the literature that the other member is reading, because in fact there's plenty of studies that show when a class gets below a critical mass, that there's actually declining return on investment because you don't have the critical mass to have a really dynamic class. You have kids helping other kids, and you don't have that. That's a pedagogical discussion. But what I don't know, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but what I don't see is I don't see a focus on in-classroom supplies, manipulatives, materials. I do see a heavy concentration in bodies and in technology. And we've been going down that path for many, many years. And the argument was always put that it's a tool. The technology's a tool, I get it. But when your only tool is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. And we're not seeing the ROI on the scores that you're referencing based on, several years of these practices. So I guess and this is something I bring up almost every year, and I'm not gonna move to bring up math supplies to X dollars or phys ed up to X dollars, but it seems like those are always go-to lines to save a little bit of money for things beyond our control. What I can tell you, everybody hates a 7% increase. I get that. But a 7% increase is a lot easier to sell if you can point to a laundry list of direct student services, of an investment in direct learning, not just adding more bodies, because, we've got a lot of testimony from a wide spectrum of members here that there's a lot of people a lot of adults in that building. So I'm not sure we're necessarily going down the right path. I can't make the motion. I don't know the school well enough. I've certainly have reached out to the administrations in years past. I guess one of my questions is, when we see these numbers, right? So I'm on page 3, which is basically classroom supplies, right? More or less. Am I defining that correctly? Are these numbers the must-haves? Is this the must-haves and some wants? Or is this the must-haves and some extra stuff to actually move the ball forward? One of the things that we don't, and I ask this every year, right, but we don't seem to get a lot of transparency. What do these numbers represent? Because I know how school budgeting worked when I taught, and so I'm just curious if someone could talk to that.
I think it would help if it was actual lines. So to piggyback on your question, because you hit a line.
But I don't. But let me explain it. So when I was a teacher, the superintendent's got to get a budget for a school board. The super asks the administration for a budget. The administration goes to the department head and asks for department heads for budgets. The department heads ask teachers for a budget. The teachers craft a budget. They give it to the department head. Department head gives it to the principal. Principal gives it to the superintendent. Superintendent gives it to the school board. And there shifts up and down all through that process. So my question is, the numbers that we have in front of us, how do those relate to what the classroom teachers and/or the department heads are really looking for, and what were their instructions in crafting a budget? Was it to keep the number down? Was it, come in with your dreams? If I could just get some transparency as to how we're crafting this at the district level, it would be very helpful for me.
So They were asked to provide three numbers. What do you need? What would you want? And like if it were Christmas time and money were raining from the sky, what would we get then? This is closer to the what would you need number. That's essentially your question, right?
That was the
And so we
budget
tried
draft from the
to-
school was the what you need number, the gray line?
No, the, whatever number's in there now, that's where we're
Column
at.
J is the what do you need line.
Okay.
And so, we tried to itemize a lot in the lines to show what particularly we're talking about. There's not, and I understand what you're talking about, but there's not a lot of, we tried to be very transparent this time. There were certainly things people had asked for. The gym teacher had asked for heart monitors. He has an interactive program he wanted to get. He thought would be really robust for PE. That was the first thing cut off. So those, and that wasn't so much as if it's raining from the sky, but he does a fantastic job of using technology, not for technology's sake, but really, like he does, you know, in the moment quizzes that give instant feedback to the kids so that they can track their stuff and learn from it, and which is in a PE class is weird to me, but it's super effective.
That was actually, if I can interrupt you, I wanted to ask specifically on that line because 5,800 to 900 seemed like quite a jump.
That's the monitors.
That, okay, so how much were those?
Yeah.
Roughly?
Yeah, whatever the difference is. I'll
Really?
take exactly that number.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So there was enough, it's a program and also the monitor.
Yep.
It's a full package. Is that-
So, yeah, oh yeah, this is where I want to go, thank you. So the 900, if I was to take a guess, not knowing, the 900 represents, well, we don't play dodgeball anymore, but this is new hockey pucks, new hockey sticks.
They actually list what we're gonna get.
Okay, so I just got it, I haven't dug through it. But basically, this is a maintenance
Correct,
budget for PE.
correct.
It's a maintenance budget for music.
Well, so, I don't want to answer. Music, there was, yeah, that's right.
Okay, I'll dig through it. I have to admit, you know, I say it every year, and every year we sort of, and it's your first year as principal, so I can just tell you what, you know, what other administrators have done in the past, and this is sort of what we've seen year to year to year. Certainly, I would support moving, no pun intended, the ball forward in some of these direct student supplies. I have to admit, when I go into classrooms, other than technology, I see need. I think I see need from where I would want to be, and I would encourage that discussion because that's where the money should be invested. But anyway, I'm just babbling, so I'll yield.
It does, I have to say, I agree with you on some of these lines. It seems awful small for an entire school to use as consumable items. Do we have further, Andrea?
Yes, just on this line, since we're, or this page, when you get down to line 82,
On page 3, yep.
yeah, software, REG ed programs, down by 7,600 from voted last year. Did we actually purchase whatever that was? And now we don't, you know, is it a one-time thing?
That was for Microsoft licenses. I'm not certain if they've been purchased, but they're planned to be purchased. Yeah, I don't know when that works as far as actually buying the programs. But that was what that bump was.
Okay,
They're
so it was
also-
like last year it was needed, but this year we wouldn't need it because we're up to date again. In other words, you brought it back down to 1,500.
Yeah, and there was new server software also in the notes. And also, some things that we would have in the past have bought software for.
Yeah, I see it
You-
says subscription instead.
Yeah, now it's a different model, so we would still get that, but in a different line. So you don't, a lot of companies are moving away from software to, you know, paid subscription they can.
Thank you.
But there was, yeah, also the Microsoft Office and the service.
We're actually moving ahead pretty quickly. We're farther than I thought we would be by 5 after 8. Do we have further questions? We're obviously not going to get through this whole thing tonight. We have to digest some more. One question on all of our attendees. Our next meeting's Thursday here at the same time. Are we going to have most of you back, or? I just want to make sure I use the time.
We have another meeting that night.
Right.
We actually have 3 that day.
So for next week, we will have Mr. Smith, building personnel from DCS, but SAU staff is
So
previously engaged.
I'd really encourage anybody, if you have questions while we have them sitting in front of us, please utilize their time. Andrea?
Yes, I'd like to go to the topic of default budget, which I know that's probably Amber's purview, so while she's here, that's page 30 to 34. And this year, we have much more detail about default budget, and the fact that we did just got me more confused. So, as I look at it, the 12,835,321, I can look at last year, and I can see that that was the 12,738 and some change, increased by 31,540, which was a warrant article for para contract, and 65,000 for 2 expendable trust allocations. As I read the default budget law, my understanding is this budget is done in what we call an indirect method, which means you start with everything that's there, and then you take out and add back, as opposed to direct method budgeting, which, you know, is what we're doing when we put numbers together from the bottom up. So, if I started with the 12,835,321, the very first thing I would have had was special warrant articles, one-time expenses. I have the 65,000 2 warrant articles I would subtract out because they are not things that belong in that budget number. Now, the contract things that you add back in, those all look good to me, but I would also subtract out the engineering study. That was a one-time study that should not be in the default budget. I would subtract out the census. I would subtract out that software registration because it's a one-time thing. There was a computer network replacement, which was a one-time thing.
I think we're going to have to interrupt you real quick, and I think Zach's going to say the exact same thing I would, that this is a general recommend. You guys, in the case of the budget failing, you are crafting the default budget after. This is just a very rough explanation of the default budget, correct?
This is the proposed default budget.
Correct, but what I will say is a lot of the lines that you're mentioning on page 33, those lines are in there. So if you took a line, look at line, I wish I should have put numbers, I apologize, but almost to the middle to the end where it says contracted services, 2310, 330, you'll see that that's $14.99. That's not included in there.
Well, no, actually, what I'm saying is, I think it's backwards about what you're saying it's not included. The only way it would not be included is if you did a subtraction over here. Again, this is an indirect budget. The fact is, it is already in the 12,835,000. If you do not subtract it out, just writing it on a piece of paper and saying, I'm not including it, does not do that.
So if you look at basically, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you look at the pages 33 and 34, those are all the smaller lines. Those tally up, and when you figure it all together, the 20,735, that deduction is on that default in that not included section.
Yeah, but what it says is not included. It says the default budget actually comes out as a higher number. Again, I'm just saying that is not what the default budget law says about how you do it. Again, just simply listing it there. She has identified, I mean, we have a list. Every single change is either on this sheet of paper or this sheet. Okay, we have competing sheets here. However, I do want to say, I wish that maybe if Amber would like to speak to me, independently sometime, I'd like to review this further because, in fact, as I read default budget law, this is not how it should be done. In other words, there's a bunch of pieces that are okay, but the things that are one-time items should be subtractions
I would-
out of that top number.
I would also mention that there were 2 warrant articles last year that said the municipal budget committee does this.
Oh, I know that,
Not
actually,
default
I read the default budget law, and the law says it is the purview of the school board to prepare it. I'm just saying, if it's prepared incorrectly,
I would
There
just say
should-
that this is for our reference and for us to digest. We don't,
we don't prepare it. I'm just saying, I would like it to be done correctly so that the taxpayer has the right comparison. My number, I did a rough one using, again, indirect budgeting, and I came to a default number somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,253,000.
I'm sorry.
Well, 13,253,600. And
That one is important.
yes, it is. I didn't go
Repeat
to
that
all the
number one more
I
time.
didn't go to all the detail that Amber did, like line by line, and I may have made some assumptions about contracted services that maybe I don't have full details. What I'm saying is, this default budget should be last year's numbers increased by contractual amounts and decreased by one-time items. And there are a huge number of one-time items that are not subtracted out. And again, I'm just saying, I know indirect and direct. I've taught accounting
I would
for
just say-
43 years, or 35 years, whatever the number was. And so I'm not saying that we have any ability to change this number other than to influence somebody to go back and look at it and say, was it done correctly? And I believe it is not.
okay. Phil?
I guess if Andrea was going to be talking to the SAU, I guess I'd like to have it here publicly. I don't understand direct or indirect budget after your 43 years of teaching, but I would like to understand how this number is calculated. And if the two of you talk without us hearing, then I don't know that that's of any benefit.
Right, well, that's why I wanted to bring it up today, because I knew that this is something that Amber would need
Well,
to.
then Can we then just give the supervisory union the directive to say, review the law, underline the lines that you followed, and then come back to us when they come back and say, this is how we interpret it. And if the two of you don't agree with the interpretation, then we need to get a third party.
Well, what I would say, again, this is our budget. Our budget is not the default budget. We can ask the school board rep to bring that to the SAU, but our budget is the budget that's in front of us.
Right.
Kevin?
Yeah, so shifting gear, I'm not opposed to looking at the default budget, but I want to shift gears. Process a little slow, so I'm coming back to where I was before. I would like to request, if it's possible, for Mr. Smith, Principal Smith, he'll be joining us next Thursday. I would relish the opportunity to, so we have a maintenance budget for our lines we discussed. I would love to see what a, nudge the ball forward list looks like. I would love to see the Christmas list, especially if it comes with dollar amounts. Because if I had especially if the committee could get it before Thursday, so there'd be some time to digest the information. People may be in a better position to make some motions. So if that information is available, I would be obliged.
All right. Do you have anything further, again, to the SAU people who are here?
The only other thing, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yep.
so we're going to get.
Page. Just
Yeah,
so we're
sorry,
all on the same
51.
page. I can see what you're looking at, but not
No.
everybody.
51?
51.
Class size.
Class size. So we're going to get a copy of last year's sheet, just so we can get, some rolling data, I guess is the best way to describe it. And I would appreciate it if somebody could articulate the pedagogical argument to go from class sizes of low 20s to mid-teens in the transition from 3 to 4. That justification I would be interested in hearing. But I'd like to see the other numbers before we necessarily have that conversation.
Our recording secretary might need you to spell that word, too.
I would have to reference an electronic device. My spelling skills are not what they should be.
I'm just saying for the record, I bet she'll have a problem.
Brother Joe is never happy with my spelling ability.
Any further questions? We are actually, I figured we'd be going to at least 9 on this, but if,
Mr.
Andrew?
Chairman, I just have one that,
Page 9.
yeah, I'm on page 9. There is somebody called the network technician that went up by $9,800, and I was wondering if that was a contract position. It says hourly back in the roster, and I was wondering, is this more hours? Is it, a raise? What's happening with the network technician?
That's line 276 on
Oh, sorry.
page 9.
What that is actually after the budget was voted, I believe that individual received a raise, and so that is actually the wage that that individual is making today, so we will be short in that line. So there are no salary increases within the individual lines for positions. Those are located at the end of the budget in a lump sum fashion.
That individual was working a considerable amount more than he was being compensated for, so it was correcting compensation to fall in line with what that individual was doing.
Okay, and I think if I just heard Amber say it correctly, he's already been given the raise, so like the voted for 17, 18 is going to be blown out of the water a little because, in fact, so next year is not a big increase above where he is this year.
That is correct.
And is he on a contract basis?
He's on a year-to-year contract.
So
Everyone's on a year-to-year contract.
the people that are full-time?
Everybody actually receives a contract. Every employee does. It's just whether they're under an agreement, whether they have the purview of 2-week at will, or whether you're under a union agreement or so forth.
And which does this fall under?
This falls under, I believe, I don't, so no, that you'd be 2-week. If something were to occur, it'd be 2-week notice.
Thank you.
At will employee.
Just for clarification, difference, what does the network technician do?
Maintains the network.
Thank you, Zach.
So there is a fair bit of technology inside the building. So the network technician works to make sure everything operates smoothly. He maintains and does updates on all the devices and everything along those lines. So that is very much a full-time job to maintain all the systems inside the school. The technology teacher works with students directly on various projects in the usage of technology.
So that would be the
and everything
split. One is
One is-
more of a building end,
Yeah.
and one is student.
Correct.
End. Okay. Just so we're not doubling up on.
else. Correct.
Just to be clear, so it would be my understanding that and I don't know what the title is, but the technology teacher, she could work on network stuff. The network technician that we're talking about cannot work directly with students, right? Except for under supervision as like a.
So, she may have the expertise to work on the network, but networking's like a pretty specific thing, so his expertise in that area is certainly more than hers. He does not have the integration experience that she has, so he would not push into a classroom in general.
But so is he a certified teacher? Does he hold the license?
No.
No, so
He works
Not
with-
teaching staff.
right.
non-teaching staff, so that the teacher could slide over and help, right?
Yes.
That's easy.
Right.
sliding the other direction. If somebody said, well, let's get him in the classroom for one period a day, that is not really tenable, other than a guest.
Right. Like for after-school club, they do the coding
Right.
thing. I think he's part of that. And he has the expertise in some things, but no, he would.
But he's not certified teacher,
That's
so
right,
he-
he's not.
Thank you. Exactly.
Anybody else, specifically people we haven't heard from? Ben?
The little things, again, the school board did vote to reduce their stipends down to $1. We did choose to move some money into a line for the parents that are here. We did a barbecue kind of at the beginning of the school year as a kickoff to the school year. So we chose to move some money into that line. Basically, we cut our salary down to support that. We thought that was a great event, and it was nice to get the community back together in September. So little things. Questions?
You actually jogged my memory. So a constituent asked me, and I didn't know the answer. Can the school board avail themselves of any part of the teacher benefit package? So can a school board member buy into the health insurance pool or anything like that?
No.
Great, that's what I thought was the case. Great, thank you.
I am married to a teacher, so I do enjoy the benefits that teachers have, but in a different district.
I was told some other districts do that.
I think
Some other
Manchester
towns do
does.
that.
Yeah, some other towns do it, but not here.
Yeah, I know that's something in Manchester, and I'm sure those benefits carry a bit of weight.
I actually,
Value.
you guys cutting your salaries back to $1. I mean, I know why you did it, but on the other hand,
Why?
you're spending a lot of time driving back and forth, and I mean, it doesn't pay your gas, but at least it gives you something.
We're getting paid a lot more than we are.
No, actually, we're getting paid about the same. We will be.
Further school stuff, or should we make the jump to town, which is gonna be a really quick update? Yes?
I just want to note that also in this packet is your revenue, estimated revenue projection, where we're going to be. Is that something we're
It
going
might
to
be
go over
worthwhile
tonight?
while Amber's here, just to review that real quick.
Where do we find that in?
That is on page 45. Just so we could go over some of the changes that have occurred since tax rate setting. In Deerfield's case, it is minor in comparison to some of the other districts. But the adequacy aid is a number that I received from the Department of Ed just on November 15th. So that is an updated figure of what they believe we will receive next year for the 18-19 budget. So we are looking at a decrease of $14,000 in adequacy aid. But we are looking to receive a $19,000 increase in state education tax. So that gives a little bit of an offset there, which is nice. We have a slight decrease in catastrophic aid of $6,400, and that is derived off of the services that students receive. So that can fluctuate depending on whatever services the students are receiving at that point in time. So that potentially could fluctuate throughout the year.
So that one's actually based on a special education?
It is,
Okay.
yes. And we do also look at that conservatively. I was given a slightly higher figure than that, and we do take a little bit off of that in case there is a transition that occurs during the year. Medicaid is another area that is a reduction of $19,000, and that again is derived off of services that individual or students receive throughout the year. So that number as well is dependent on the services that those students receive during the fiscal year. So again, that could fluctuate depending on what services are actually provided. We have some students that if a student moves, we would lose revenue that way. If a student comes in, they may need extra services, so it all depends on what's needed at that point in time. Other than that, the big fluctuation that you're seeing, as we talked about earlier this evening, is in regards to food service. The transfer amount from operating budget into the food service budget has decreased, so there would be less revenue happening there. I did want to note that at the bottom of this page, I put a note that says the actual change in revenue is 37,000, and that's because when you look at the sheet, you see this glaring 581,000, and you're not actually short that much, or the change isn't actually that much. We need to take into consideration the warrant articles that took place for this current fiscal year, as well as the surplus that was returned back to the town to offset the taxes.
Oh, Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to make sure I understand this. This one always befuddles people. So the state education tax is the statewide property tax on assessed value in Deerfield, and what we send to Concord makes a U-turn and comes back to Deerfield. Is that correct?
I believe so. This figure is derived off of a document that the Department of Ed gives us, so it's not the number that's off of like tax after your actual tax rate sheet. I'd have to go back to see if that's the actual figure. I'm not positive, to be honest.
Okay.
I don't want to give an incorrect answer. It is the calculation for adequacy aid, and the information that's included on the sheet that the state gives us is extensive, and there is a lot of data on there. And the formula, as you may have seen, is quite complex.
So let me follow up, because I think the state education tax, I think is more simple. I think that's the statewide property tax for education, so what goes out comes back in.
I believe so.
The adequate education grant is not so transparent to the casual observer.
That is correct.
And so they estimate, so there's an attendance number that is published, what is it, October 1st?
Yes, I believe they use the October 1st number for the ADM.
So ADM is the October 1st kids in seats number, and they use that to estimate, but then they don't do the final calculation until sometime after the school year, where it's actually the actual attendance in the average daily attendance in the school for the year. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, I believe every year in March, I have received from the state anything that's changed. What I will say is, when I've received those figures, they have been either very, very close. I mean, the changes have been very minimal.
Yep.
But I do receive another figure in March. Well, unfortunately, it's after the budget has been set.
And, right, and that calculation, this calculation, adequate education grant, lags a year. So this dollar value is based on a previous year's enrollment. So if you have declining enrollment, that system works good because you're getting more money for kids you don't have. If you have increasing enrollment like we do, because it lags, you're not getting as much as you would like to have each year. Is that
That is
fairly
correct.
accurate? Great, thank you, Ms. Wheeler. I just wanted to get us closer to the 8:30 number that the chairman is looking for.
We're close now. Any
Can
further
I just make one more comment?
Right.
Just because this is a document that, this estimated revenue, while I present it to you and the board presents it to you, this is a document that if there are any numbers that you are uncomfortable with, it is worthy to have conversation and changes can be made. This is a document that we would work on collaboratively. So if you seek changes, please let me know.
further questions on the school?
Well, since she said that, I have a quick question.
Yep.
So do we have any historical data as to how close we come for actual revenue versus anticipated revenue over a period of time?
Yes, the document that you see before you is actually very, very long. I just hide many columns. I don't know how far it goes back. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there are multiple years on this spreadsheet, so we could definitely track trends. And it does show you what was budgeted in the wintertime at budget session, what was actually occurred at the end of a fiscal year, and then what is budgeted at tax session.
So I would be interested, if it's easy to get at, how close our actual revenue comes to what we estimated our revenue to be on, say, like the last 10 years. If that's easy to get at, that it would be interesting to see if it's moving around or if we have a consistency. I'd be interested in that, if that's
Certainly, I will provide you with whatever data that I have.
in a nice one-page little graph.
It-
I don't need the spreadsheet. I just want to know if our real
Total.
revenue, if our actual revenue and our estimated revenue, what the differential is for like a 10-year period, just to see if it's consistent and if we're over, if we're under, or if we're right on.
Sure, I can do that. I'm not quite sure I can get you that by next Thursday because we have meetings every night, but I can certainly get that for you.
And any time between now and our last meeting or two in January would be fine.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, now we're at 8:30. Any other school stuff? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming in, everybody. We're going to switch to town. Feel free to stay if you want. Feel free to leave if you don't. It's going to be pretty quick, I'm guessing, right, Andy?
Yeah, we do have a new copy of the budget tonight. This, again, is not the finalized budget. The Board of Selectmen will be finalizing our budget this coming Monday. The changes that you're likely to see to this budget, other than changes that the Budget Committee has made to the budget, which are, I believe, in this new budget tonight, and certainly will be in the final budget. We're going to reduce the health insurance line on the insurance section of the budget, probably on order of $25,000. We've made arrangements to move to a comparable plan to what we have through Tufts, which is going to save us some money. We will probably add a little bit of money back that will offset that back into the health reimbursement account that we use to help employees reimburse the rather large hospital deductible that we have on our plan. And I would say that we've always made out very well on that. Right now, we have I think we budget $10,500 for deductible reimbursement. We've never come close to spending all of that in a year. You know, it's conceivable if we had multiple employees end up hospitalized at the same time that we would, but the savings that we realize in premium is definitely offset by that. So that's the only major change that you're likely to see in our presented budget, and that will come to you in final form next week. There were a couple of questions last week. One in particular in regard to what is in the conservation fund. The balance that we had as of yesterday was $354,087.93. I believe I had incorrectly mentioned at the last meeting that I thought the cap on the conservation fund was set at $350 for town contribution from the LUTC percentage split. I believe it is actually at $500,000. It has not been at $500,000 unless we've moved money for a specifically earmarked project, but
Nice acronym, and that's the land use.
land
change.
use tax change,
Yeah.
which typically is a 10% penalty when you take your land out of current use for development that is assessed at the time. Kevin had also asked about impact fees and what were used by the road agent last year, and I believe John sent you a copy of this, Kevin, but the listed projects suggested by the road agent totaled to $124,000. Mark was going to start with available impact fees at that moment in time, which were $118,924.
So are any of those, I know when when Rick was talking, the transfer station, do any of those highway funds have to go back since?
No, I don't believe so. We have a 6-year window on those, and the projects that we are planning on completing, we are still planning on completing in the spring. We got held up this fall. I believe impact fees were used possibly on some of the work at the transfer station. I'm not.
Yes, I know
Yes.
Rick spoke to that, yeah.
Yep.
The new addition on the side of the.
Correct.
What is the name of the building? The swap shop building, I
It's
guess.
basically a storage building, and it's, as Rick explained, we need it to keep things that we can't expose to the weather that we're holding until we have a significant volume of to move. Other than that, you'll see your final budget. We'll have copies of it available next week. You can vote on it or not vote on it at your leisure, subject to the municipal calendar.
Questions for town?
Mr. Chairman,
Kevin?
I'd like to turn our attention to page 49.
Which is road resurfacing, road reconstruction.
Yep.
And specifically line 735, second from the bottom. And I'd like to make a motion to increase the $257,000 by $100,000, so the total would be $357,000. I'd look for a second.
Second.
Just, we have new players, so we got everybody down now. Phil seconded. You want to speak to your motion, Kevin?
I do. So highway came up, well, highway comes up every year. One of the recurring messages that I get from constituents is a perception of the degrading and the quality of the roads in Deerfield. And we're always, bottom line conscious, there's no doubt about that. Historically, one of the things that has always scared us is snow removal. We are now blessed to have an emergency snow removal, road treatment, et cetera, trust fund, so that if we have a very bad year, we've got a reserve to go for, so we don't have to try to keep that money isolated. I made this motion last year, it was seconded, and it was defeated. And my reason last year for making the motion is the same as making it this year. And one of the things that we were told is the highway agent had been consulted and said, even if you put the money in the budget, I won't spend it, so don't put the money in there. Then later in the year, we realized that we have impact fees and we have road projects totaling an extra $124,000 beyond the $230,000 plus or minus that we spent this year in the budget, that we tried to spend, but because the money came late, the planning didn't really allow for those projects to get off the ground. Most of that money is not timing out, and those projects will be done this year. But I will contend that the application of the impact fees and the amount of $124,000 shows the continued need, and in fact, I think there's a need. And so that's why I'm making a motion to increase that line by less than 50%. I mean, it's a big increase. It's $100,000. But we've got a lot of roads that are really getting washboardy, they're crumbling, and the longer, we've had testimony year after year after year from the highway agent, that the longer we let these roads go, the more and more expensive they are to maintain. If you can get on it early, skim coat it, and put an inch, you buy many years versus letting it crumble where you have to grind it up, dig it down, lay a new base, and start all over. That's much more expensive. I'm afraid we're allowing a significant amount of mileage of our roads to approach that condition, and I would rather spend a little bit of extra money, $100,000. To say $100,000 is a little bit of money, but for roads, it actually is. I would rather spend a little bit of extra money each year to be proactive and get ahead of this before this becomes a bigger issue. And that's why I made the motion for the $100,000. If it goes into the budget this year, it gives the highway agent plenty of time to be able to plan proper use and application of the money. The other thing is, we find when we put warrant articles for fixing roads and we specify what road, it pits neighbor against neighbor. I don't drive down Road X. I'm not spending $100,000 to fix Road X. If we simply leave it at the discretion of the highway agent to hit, red list, yellow list, green list, go from high priority to low priority, it takes all of that out of the equation, and I would ask the committee to support the motion.
Before I get to hands up, I just want to say this is one time where I completely agree with Kevin. I'm going to get to Andy first.
You say that a lot this year. I like that.
On this one, I completely agree with everything you just said. Andy?
Yeah, just by way of explanation, I don't think that the Board of Selectmen would necessarily disagree with Kevin's motion. For those of you that have, know the role of the highway agent. The highway agent is an independent elected official, and the key to the explanation and understanding of why money might not be asked for is the fact that he's an elected official. I think highway agents are very cognizant of the fact that if they are seen as spending too much money, they could be voted out of office, and quite frankly, it goes for a 3-year period, but your ability to keep your salary, keep your benefits, depends on your ability to get reelected as a highway agent. And I think that's probably in the mind of highway agents when they don't come forward with a large number for road reconstruction. But I don't doubt that, I think Kevin's logic is sound. When the money's available and it doesn't show up in the, as adding directly to the tax rate, the highway agent is on it. So I think there is some logic to Kevin's
Zach?
methodology here.
Has the select board talked about warrant articles for road reconstruction this year? Is that something that you've looked at yet?
We have not, and just insider tip, as Kevin has mentioned, if the road agent or the selectmen suggest a road needs to be a warrant article, it's probably because they don't intend to do it, and they know darn well if they make it a warrant article, it won't pass.
Mr. Chairman?
Road last year.
I was going to let Phil hit next.
Well, just to that point, if I may, it'll be quick. So before I made the motion last year, I went digging through about 10 years' worth of warrants, and there wasn't a specified section of road article that ever passed in that 10-year period. So if you say part of Road X, it fails.
And
So
it doesn't matter if it's from the town or a petition.
It
just
fails.
And it's code on the town
Phil?
side.
I support the motion entirely. Very well put, Kevin, thank you. And I understand exactly what Andy just said, which you both referenced. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I will also go on record as saying that if this gets put into the budget and the current highway agent chooses to run for reelection and he gets badgered because his budget was up by $100,000 in 2018, I grant him every liberty to say, go blame Verville. He's the one that made the motion and tricked them all into passing it.
Well, I think we can probably easily call for a vote on this.
I just want to hear the highway agent say, go blame Verville, so.
We didn't fix his road.
I'm on a new road.
He just has to get to it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion passes unanimously.
That will be in the final version of the
The selectmen
budget as your
might like
recommendation.
that? Okay. Any further town budget changes? Andrea?
I'd just like, since you brought up page 26, I dragged out the old one.
Didn't know we brought up page 26.
Yeah, yeah, we was talking about the health insurance went down. Why did dental, go up by 50%? And then the other one that went up significantly is retirement. And is that relative to the positions that we added last time? Anyway, the overall number went from 452,192 up to 455,907, so,
Yeah, and I will certainly defer to John for that, but I suspect that both of those numbers have to do with budgeting for new positions.
That's correct. The new positions and dental insurance, we did not enjoy a reduction this year. Dental insurance actually is going up next year. So between the combined adding of new positions and the increase in rates, you're seeing that increase in the dental line.
And I would note that we did look at some other dental options and were not able to find anything more favorable.
Further questions on town? Okay. All right, that brings us to old business, if we have any. I don't think we do. Any new business? I don't think we do.
I would make a motion to adjourn.
So we don't have any citizens' comments. All those in favor?
citizens all left.
That also is unanimous for the tape recorder. I figured I'd be home by 9:30, so I'm pleasantly surprised by the 8:45.
Now, which one was mine?
You have